Welcome to day 17 of the query folding challenge. It's been a long journey. And for today's challenge, the instruction is to select the top 10 and bottom 10 date key, shift, calls, average time per issue, and a computed column named total time, which is the multiplication of calls and average time per issue. For the PM shifts based on total time in ascending order. We are to use the Adventure Works database, and we are to also use the fact call center table. So let's head over to Power BI. We're on Power BI, and the first step as usual is to connect to the data source. Select the Adventure Works database, then find the fact call center table. Select the table, click on OK. Click on OK to import the data. So for today's challenge, I'm going to be doing something a bit different. Usually we apply the steps here. So I realized that Power Query can write Power Query functions in Visual Studio. So if you have Visual Studio, you can follow along. And if you don't have Visual Studio, you can also apply the same steps here in Power Query. So the whole goal of this is to make me comfortable writing this code in Power Query. And the objective will be that I'll be able to write cleaner codes, and I'll also understand how the M programming works, the M programming language, how it works. And I get to put some of the skills I've learned to use. So for the first step, we need to select columns. So I'm going to switch over to Visual Studio and try to create a file. If you have a Visual Studio, you can also follow along. So this is my Visual Studio. I already have a folder on my desktop for M programming. So I can call this challenge 17. Then for Power Query files, you are to save the files as .pq. When you save it as PQ, Visual Studio understands. But for Visual Studio to understand what is happening here, you need to install an extension. The extension you need to install is called Power Query. Let me see. Okay, I'm presently offline, so I should be able to scroll down and see the extension. This is the extension that you need to install, the Power Query M language. So if you don't have this extension installed, you're going to run into issues and you may not be able to write your code. You're not going to get, there will be no form of IntelliSense, right? So because you need the IntelliSense to write your code faster and to confirm that your codes are working fine. So after installing this extension, you can just go back to the file you just created, which is challenge 17. So, we've already taken the first step in Power Query. You can right click on this, go to the advanced editor and copy the code that you have here. Click on done, then come back to Power Query and paste the code. So you realize that our source in this instance is the SQL database. I had to provide a database on my system. This may be different. This will be different because you need your local database. You connect to your local database. From this point, it's most likely going to be the same since we are using the same database, the AdventureWorks database, then the schema and the name of the table that we want to work with. So you realize that these three steps are the steps that was able to get our data for us. But then we also want to select columns. So now we want to select the date key, calls, shifts, and average time. Let me confirm. And average time per issue. Then we have to create a total time. So to select these columns, we have two options. We can choose to either add a new step or we can select those columns directly here. So what we can do is to expand and just bring this step down and we have this. I'm just formatting this to look neater on my own end. So this is what it looks like by default. So I can now specify the columns that I want to select, and I want these columns to come as tables. So I'm going to use a square bracket here and go back to the file. If I go back to the file, I can choose to copy. Okay, I can copy from here directly. Let me switch to this. So I can copy these files. I can copy the list of columns from here and switch over to Visual Studio and paste the columns I've selected inside the square bracket. And the name of each column has to be correct. Then you don't have to use text, just type the name of the columns and you will be fine. And to see if this is true, to see if this is working fine, you can copy this step and take it back to Power Query. You see that by default here, we have the list of all columns. We can just go to the advanced editor and paste the new code that we've written. The new code that you've written is fine here, no error message, and everything looks okay. You can click on done. After clicking on done, you now realize that you have all the columns. You've been able to select the columns that you want, and you see how this looks very neat right here. That's step one. Step two, we need to apply a filter to this data, because when you read part of the condition, we know for where the shift, say PM shift, PM shifts. That's what we are trying to focus on. We are focusing on the PM shift. Let's head over to Power Query. So we have to apply a filter where the shift must contain PM. That's our focus. We want to take away midnight. We want to take away, is there AM? I don't see that. We have to take away all the midnight. Okay, there's AM. There's AM. We have to take away the midnight as well. So let's try and go to Visual Studio and write that code and see what it looks like. After each block of code, you just have to separate it with a comma. So here, what we do, we want to select rows. So we just start a simple step and call the step select rows. We can make sure we understand what we're doing. We can say PM only. This is equal to. So what we can do here is to use a table dot select rows. This is the function that we're going to be using. The parameters we're going to be passing is, for the first parameter, we have to pass a table. So we are going to be passing the previous step, the result of the previous step as a table here. So we use DBO fact call center. Then up next, we need to apply the condition. Okay, what should we check to select the rows? To do that, we are going to be iterating through the shift column. So to make sure that it does not contain, we keep only values that contain PM. So we use the Text.Contains function. So contain is going to be checking, okay, which column are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at the shift column. Shift, comma. Now we need to provide the substring to be checked. The substring is PM. So if it contains PM, we want to keep that row, right? So up next, that means the result we want to return should be select rows PM only. So we can just copy this. So I need to figure out a way to test this directly in Power Query. I know it may be possible, but I've not really checked it out. If I find out, I'm going to be sharing that with you as well. Then click on OK. It's fine if you run into errors. You shouldn't be worried. You can write your code here, make mistakes. When you come here, you can also figure it out as test it. Now you realize that for all the values, this is the last step we just applied. Select rows PM only. And now you see that we have just PMs. And you see our filter works fine. And you can also look at this gear icon here. If you click on the gear icon, it's going to show you what we just did. It contains PM. that means we are doing a great job and everything is working fine. Not experienced any issue for now. So what we need to do now is to calculate the total time column. The total time column is a multiplication of calls and average time per issue. Let's head over to Visual Studio. Remember, always add a comma before you start a new block of code. So what we want to do here is to add a new column, add column. So we'll just say the name of this column is total time. This is equal to table, add column, which is why it is very important for you to install the extension. Without the extension, you're going to run into issues and you won't really know what to do. So what we need to do next is to provide the name of the table. We're going to be using the previous row. This is a table, so we use select PM only as a table. And now we need to provide, look at the prompt, we need to provide the name of the new column. Which name are we going to be giving this new column? The name of the new column is called total time. That's great. Up next, the column generator. We need to write the function that will generate this column for us. It will just be a simple code. For this instance, we are multiplying calls by average time per issue. I can just copy this out if I don't want to type it and paste it here. But instead of comma, I'm going to be multiplying. I'm going to be multiplying this, right? So after multiplying this, you also have the option to specify the data type, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see what it looks like. If I'm not mistaken, I should be able to specify the type. And we say the type is a number, or you can specify the type as int 64 type. I believe any of the two should work. If we run into issues, we can always modify it. So we need to change the last step here to the step we just applied. Save. Always save your code. So we come back here and just test this out. Understand that the back and forth can be crazy, but the reason I'm doing this is to make sure so that you can see what's happening step after step. On my own, I can just write it there and just move on. I think learning how to test this in Visual Studio will also be fun and will make the experience better. Click on done. And now it says, did you use the field shorthand for each out of each expression? And this is where it's telling us that there's an error here. It's also good to understand the error. There are instances where you forget to write your code properly. It's good you also know how to debug, right? Did you use the field shorthand for outside of each operation? So we are supposed to, remember that we are iterating, we are going through the row, so we need to specify this to be each. So what it does is to multiply each. So it does a row by row multiplication, right? So without this each, that wouldn't work. So let's save this one more time and go back to where we are testing our code. Click on done. And this is working fine. You see what our code looks like? Simple code. And it's cleaner to read. From my own perspective, this code is cleaner to read. We get a time to also do things in our own way. I remember that int64 worked fine, right? You can test the other option I mentioned earlier, which is type, number, and that will also work fine. You get that? But we have whole numbers here, we don't have decimals and stuff. So if you use int64, that will still work out for you. Z, so this should be int64 type from the source. So that's great. realize that we've been able to apply these two steps. Now, let's look at what the next action is. The next action is telling us to select the top 10 and bottom 10. So we need to select the first 10 and the last 10. That means this is based on the total time column because we have to sort the column in ascending order such that the smallest values are at the top and the largest value are at the bottom. So I ran into a lot of issues when I was trying to solve this particular problem. And finally, I found a solution that works. I was trying to, initially, I was sorting, select top 10, select bottom 10. I was doing a lot of stuff. And finally, I figured out a way that works and is more efficient. So let me share that with you. So what I did was to, now that I have my values and I need to select the top 10 and the bottom 10 in a single query. That's the goal, which is why this is why we are doing query forging, right? We want a single query to do this job for us. So the first step is that, remember that we are using the total time column. I want to get the list of all the values in the total time column. So to get a list of all the values in the total time column, let's add a new step. For this new step, we can call it, you can say list of total time, and we'll say this is equal to. So what we want to do here is to reference the previous step, which is add columns, total time. And remember the name of the column we want to get is called total time. So we have these values now, this single column now, we have the values as a list. What we can do is to make sure that we have distinct values. We don't want duplicates. So we use the List.Distinct function. This is going to make sure that all the values, all the results from these columns are unique. That's fine. We've done one step. But we need to sort the values in this column from the minimum to the largest value. So we use the list sort, use the list sort function, right? So I'm going to copy this, take it one step up, sorry, and paste this here. So we have the distinct list of values that we want to sort. So we need to provide the order in which these values should be sorted. So we use order ascending. Now we have the list of total time, all total time values sorted from the minimum value to the largest values. So we can just add a little documentation here for ourselves. Create a list of sorted total time values. You can just say distinct list of sorted total time values. Now we've been able to do that. This does the job for us. So now we have the list of values. So we need to be able to select the first 10 and the last 10. Now our goal here now is to be able to identify where the first 10 stops and where the last 10 starts from. So if you know where the first 10 stops, the first 10 values stop, and you know where the last 10 values start from, you can just select these values using your query. So let's go about it. So the first step is to know where the range of our value is going to start from. So we can call the start value as range start, for example, range start. So to get the range start, this is pretty straightforward. List. The list also has a function for first. So we want to select the first 10 values from the sorted list of total time. So we are selecting the first 10 values. Now, if we have selected the first 10 values, we want to get the last value in this list. Now, you remember that for these values, the index starts from 0. So if we want to select the last value here, we'll be using 9. So this tells us where the first 10 values, this is the last value, it tells us where it stopped. That's great. We can now repeat the same idea to get the where the last 10 values is going to start from. For us to do that, we use range and equal to, we use list last. This also has a last n value, so we refer to the previous list, which is list of total time. And now we want to get the last 10 values. Now remember that if we get the last value, it is going to be giving us the last value in that list. Instead, we want the start. So this tells us that this is where this list ends, the first 10 ends, but the range end tells us where the last 10 starts from. So we select the first to tell us the start. So we use 0 to reference the first item in that list. Now we have the start value and end values for our ranges. And just to be sure, let's copy this and paste this in Power Query and see what the result looks like. So I'm going to change this to the step, save, copy everything, and paste it in Power Query. Click on done. And don't be scared of errors. If you run into errors, you'll figure it out. Now you realize that we see the range end. This is where the top 10 value starts from. This is the first. Sorry, this is where the last 10 value starts from. This is the first item in that list, and this is the last item in the top 10 values, right? And you can see where we created the list of total time. So we just added a little documentation to help us. This is also to show you that you can add a little note in as you apply your steps, just to remind you of what you're doing and why you're doing that, right? So this works fine. This is the list, and these are the values we have selected. So these are the range of values we're going to use to apply filters and select our values. So let's head over to Visual Studio. Now we have these values. We can now use these values to filter the result of the data that will be returned to us from the database. How do we do that? We use a select row function. So we do select rows, we can do top. Let us select rows only first. So we are clear. So what we want to do here is to use the table function. Table, select rows. Wait. We need to provide the table where these rows should be selected from. Remember, these previous steps are list. We can't use these 3 previous steps, but we can use the add column step because that was the last place we had a table. So we come here and reference added total time. That's the name of the table. Then what is the condition? How do we want to select these rows? Remember the issue we had here earlier. So here we want to say each. Want to look at the values in each row. Which column do we want to apply this filter? We want to apply this filter in the total time column. Now we can choose to see the range of values in the middle, and that's particularly the values that we don't need. To get the values in the middle, the values that we don't want to see, that means that value has to be greater than the value in the last. Yes, how do I put this? Okay, the start range has to be greater than the last value in the first top 10 values, right? So what we do here, it has to be greater than range start. Remember that range start is the last value, the top 10 list. And we also have to ensure that total time, I think suggestions for columns names will be great. especially if I have typed it before. I don't think that is working as of now. And it has to be less than the first value in the last 10. So this will give us less than range and trait. So if we should run this, it is going to give us the values we don't want. So these are the values we want to remove. We don't want to see these values. Paste this here, save, copy, and paste this right here. And this is it. You will notice that we have over 40 rows of data here. These are not the values we want to see. These are the values in the middle. That means these are the values after the first 10 values and before the last 10 values. So all we need to do is to just modify something here, and this function will give us the results that we want. What do we need to do? We just need to negate this condition. That means presently we are selecting where this is returning true. So all we have to do next is to negate this condition such that it returns false. If it returns false, it's going to give us the first 10 and the last 10. So how do we do that? This is how we do it. All we have to do is to come here and say not. We have to make sure we wrap this right here in a bracket. So this is going to, where this condition in the middle here returns true, not true will give us false. If it returns false, not false, you get the idea now. So this is going to give us the exact values that we are looking for. And to make that happen, so I will just modify this just to help me remember what I've done here. Top 10 and last 10. I can just come back here and select top 10 and last 10. That's what. So return, copy everything, go back to the advanced editor and paste this here. And now you see that we get the values we want to see. We have just 20 records right here. We have just 20 records right here. And we've been able to solve the problem, but there's one more step. The final steps is based on total time in ascending order. So we want to make sure that our final result is sorted so that the value is increasing from the minimum to the largest value, right? So what we can do is to just apply one more step and we are done. So we can just say this is sorted, or we can just say sorted rows, nothing serious. So we say table sort, I should get suggestion, table sort, yeah, that's it. So I'll just reference the previous step, select top 10. Then to sort a value, you have to pass it in a list in case you want to sort by multiple columns. So you have to be a list of lists. So we are going to be sorting by total time. Total time. And you get to specify the order and how you want these values to be sorted. So we want this to be sorted in an ascending order, nothing serious. So we can remove this tab and say sorted rows. Save. This should work fine. Just copy and connect to right here. Paste this. So I'll explore how to test this directly in Visual Studio Code. If I find a good solution, I'll definitely start using it. And you don't have to do this in Visual Studio rather. You can do everything here directly, but I believe you get more flexibility in Visual Studio and you just get to see how functions work And I believe that this is still a beta test, right? I believe that as they keep improving on the extension, the experience here is going to improve. And this will also help with version control and writing cleaner codes, because now we can just open the advanced editor and look at the code that we've written. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's not cluttered. You can add your comments easily. It's easy on the eye. Someone can sit down, look at this code and try to read and comprehend what is happening. And the person is going to get a good idea of what is going on right here. So this solves our problem. We see that the values are sorted from the minimum, and you see this arrow here. The arrow here tells you the direction, tells you from the minimum to the highest. And now we get our values down to the highest, and we see that we have 20 rows, which where we have the top 10 and the last 10. And so in some of my videos, I forget to show if query folding is still working fine or not. So I had to re-record this part to show you that query folding is still working fine. Yeah, there may be many in our queries, but yeah, we have to deal with this, and it works fine. We don't have any performance issues as it is. You get that? So this is working fine and okay. That's the most important steps. I tried out other steps and query folding wasn't working. I think there's one more step where query folding is working, but that step isn't efficient because it's going to add extra 2 steps to this process. And I try as much as I can to optimize the solution so that we don't have extra steps, rows. So we've been able to solve today's challenge, and this has helped a lot, and it's a really good experience. So for the remaining part of the challenge, as long as the challenge is not hard and I can solve it, I hope that I'll be using the Visual Studio so that I can get used to it. That brings us to the end of today's challenge. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends. If you notice where I made a mistake or something, I missed out on something, don't forget to point it out. And because we are all learning, right? So see you tomorrow for day 18. Have a good day.